I try and get my thoughts on the record. First and foremost, I suppose that I share the Chair's concerns around the specific geographical areas for the funding. As a representative for Nottinghamshire, and Mansfield appears number 8 on the list is my constituency, and most of Nottinghamshire is on that list as well in the top 50, and we don't get any of that help and support. So obviously in making these kind of specific geographical funding areas, you create some friction there as well across other areas, which is a concern to me. We've talked, and members of the panel have touched on challenges in terms of funding for schools and local authorities, something I think we all recognise, and whether actually the more and more of these programmes that are added in, the less money there is available for that core funding for schools and local authorities. So there is certainly a challenge there, although I absolutely recognise the benefits of these programmes for the areas that have them. But I wanted to carry on the theme of kind of DFE engagement and involvement in this, because some of the evidence and initial feedback from stakeholders has suggested that the DFE have quite a controlling hand in how this works, and obviously the idea and the principle of it is that it's locally driven and locally led. So I wondered, perhaps to the chairs first and foremost, how independent do you feel you are? How does that relationship work with the DFE?
I think we have become independent. I think initially I would say there was an assumption that we would need a lot of help, and we probably did. And there was an assumption that all of the interventions that were there to be drawn on were things that we would benefit from. And I think what we've been able to do as we've matured is to be able to say, well, actually, this part of the programme is a really useful thing, and we want it, and we'd like more of it. This bit has been less helpful. And so, you know, if I take, for instance, the CEC, initially, our relationship was probably not a strong one. And there were other things that we had developed because we needed to as an area. I think that relationship has grown and developed as we've sat round the table and worked things through. And I think that the biggest benefit of this programme has been the opportunity for people to sit together, work out what works and what doesn't work, and use the interventions and the support that comes from the DFE, rather than everybody saying, well, there's this thing and maybe it's going to help and maybe it's not. I think we've been able to become much more analytical about what's useful and where we go. And I think the really critical thing from your perspective, if I may say, looking forward, is that the evaluation that we have is a place-based evaluation. I think you and we want to know how we make the most of this programme looking forward, and indeed how you might then want to roll it out to other areas, because actually there are some real benefits of people locally taking responsibility and being able to use those things that are out there to do.
I certainly look forward to seeing how we can roll the benefits out to other places on a selfish perspective, of course. But Graham, have you got anything to...
Thank you. Little to add. Same journey, command and control at the beginning, trust and relationship built up, you know, far more interactive now, and you know, frankly, we do benefit from the involvement of DFE, there's no question. There's a lot of expertise there, conduit into other areas of government. So, you know, there's a kind of mutual respect. The DFE does facilitate all the chairs getting together once every couple of months. Happy for us to do that in private so that we can, you know, we can air our concerns about the government departments. So, not particularly, you know, not a defensive behaviour from them at all, really. Just, you know, helping us to get the right answer.
You mentioned National Citizen Service. Sorry,
yeah.
Go on.
Possibly just add.
Yeah.
I think it would be even better if we had engagement from other departments. So, for instance, if we had engagement from Bays, because at the end of the day, you know, our responsibility is also for those young people who are looking towards employment and employability, and support in terms of employers engaging with education. I sit on the Heart of the South West LEP, chair the people leadership part of that, and actually getting employers to recognise how to engage with education is a big issue, and we need to have employers, you know, sort of really working together you know,
I totally agree. I think the Chair touched on a number of other organisations who are supposed to do that as well. But I just wanted to ask, you mentioned the National Citizen Service, and obviously DfE require you to work with them. Is that not an example of perhaps the DfE picking out something where I'm a big believer in the potential of National Citizen Service? The evidence suggests it doesn't really function in the way that it should, or work in the way that it should. Is that an example of the DfE saying you must work with a government project, even though it's not necessarily the best approach?
Okay, so I think the straight answer to that would be probably yes at the time. But what's happened since is that the NCS are particularly active in Blackpool, and you know, it's down when we get together as chairs. I can see that there's some fantastic work going on in different places with NCS. It just doesn't seem to be happening here. But you know, with CEC, we've got brilliant working relationship, lots of joint activity going on there. So we've moved more towards flagging those things as, you know, these look like they're going to work, to what actually works in your locality. Go after that, and that's where we are now. Clare?
Yeah, I think we would fall into the category of one of those organisations that were asked to work in all of the opportunity areas. At that time, our network across the country was just growing. So although we had some activity going on probably in all of the opportunity areas in some small way, it just meant that we could really redouble our efforts and make sure that we prioritised those areas whilst we were still building the network across the country. So I think it's more a case of not necessarily imposing it on an area, but making sure that we were committed to supporting the work there. And given that we were asked to drive up employer engagement in opportunity areas, and our remit obviously is to increase the number of employer encounters for young people, we were happy to do that by putting in some really key things around funding, coordination, which brings capability, developing business leadership, and we've got a couple of examples in the room today, and also careers leadership, which again helps to build that capability in the legacy.
Thank you. And just finally from me, sorry to focus on you two in particular, but you're probably the most direct connection in terms of this question. You mentioned getting together and having the opportunity to kind of talk about the department and to criticise potentially. Do you feel you can do that, and how vociferously can you defend your local issues when ultimately both of you, I assume, were appointed by the DfE? How independent and genuinely locally based can you be in that scenario?
I think I feel pretty independent. I think I feel able to be critical where I think it's appropriate to be critical. I have worked closely with our DfE appointed coordinator, who in her turn then works with you know, the programme kind of based in London, and I think, you know, I think we can criticise things, we can plan new things, we can address challenges. I think that's what the board is there to do, to be honest, and I certainly have never at any stage felt I haven't been able to say what I think.